9 years old, thick glasses, and somehow the most dangerous secret agent on the planet. If you remember rushing home to catch Joe McClane, the ordinary schoolboy who could fly fighter jets, perform brain surgery, and outwit enemy agents before dinner, then you already know there was something genuinely different about this show. But do you actually remember how his story ended? And do you know what American networks quietly changed about his missions when the show crossed the Atlantic? It was 1968. Kids were playing outside, dreaming about space and spies. And on British television, Gerry and Sylvia Anderson were doing something nobody had really tried before, putting a child right at the center of the danger. Not as a sidekick, as the weapon. There's a side to Joe 90 that most fans never fully noticed. And that birthday party finale? It's a little more complicated than it looks.
You know, Mac, every time I emerge from that laboratory of yours, I'm surprised to find myself in an old English cottage.
The story. Part 1. The world and heroes. The world and premise. The world of Joe 90 felt like the future we wanted. The show dropped viewers into a version of tomorrow that was sleek, optimistic, international. Humanity had figured out how to cooperate. The World Intelligence Network, WIN, existed not to fight wars, but to prevent them. Terrorism, espionage, catastrophe. WIN handled it quietly, professionally, before things could spiral. But WIN had a secret advantage nobody could have predicted. Professor Ian Mac McClane, brilliant, a little obsessive, deeply kind, had invented something called the Big Rat. Brain Impulse Galvanoscope Record and Transfer. The name is a mouthful, but the idea is beautifully simple. The machine could copy any expert's knowledge and skills directly into another person's brain. A fighter pilot's reflexes, a surgeon's hands, a nuclear physicist's understanding, all of it transferable. The catch? The only mind flexible enough to safely receive those transfers was a child's. Specifically, Mac's adopted 9-year-old son, Joe. It was Mission Impossible meets the Jetsons, with a 4th grader running point. And the Supermarionation puppetry gave everything this slightly dreamlike quality that somehow made it feel more real, not less.
Incredible. Well, Sam, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a dream come true.
The hero we wanted to be. Joe McClane wasn't built like a hero. That was exactly the point. He wore thick-rimmed glasses. He had homework. He had a bedtime. He was, in every visible way, just a kid. But put those special electrode-fitted spectacles on his face, sit him in that spinning big rat chair, and this ordinary boy suddenly had the combined expertise of some of the most skilled people alive. What stayed with you wasn't the borrowed brilliance, though. It was his courage. Every single mission, Joe chose to go. Every time that chair spun and those lights flashed, he was volunteering to step into something genuinely dangerous. He never complained about it. He never seemed to wish he could just be a normal kid for a while. And that was the quiet message underneath everything. You don't have to be tall or strong or grown up to matter. You just have to be willing to try. His relationship with Mac grounded all of it. Because Mac wasn't just sending his son into danger without a second thought. He was terrified for him, proud of him, torn constantly between what WIN needed and what a father owes his child. That tension made everything feel real in a way that pure adventure stories usually don't.
As you know, the details of the 242 are a closely guarded secret.
The WIN team. Joe didn't work alone, which was a relief given what they were asking of him. Sam Louver was WIN's deputy commander. Serious, professional, the kind of man who treated Joe as a genuine agent rather than a novelty. Sam carried the weight of institutional responsibility in every scene he was in. Shane Weston was WIN's top field agent, Joe's partner on the most dangerous assignments. He brought experience, muscle, and a kind of quiet protectiveness that balanced out the more clinical aspects of how WIN operated. Together with Mac, they formed something that functioned almost like a family. Unconventional, occasionally tense, but genuinely caring about what happened to this boy they'd placed at the center of their world.
We have no weapons that can stop it. And so the Russians have the capability of striking and destroying us at any moment they choose.
The villains. Joe 90 didn't have a single recurring nemesis, and I think that was a smart choice. Each episode brought a different threat. Hijackers, saboteurs, enemy agents, corrupt officials. They were grounded, realistic, human. These weren't cartoon supervillains. They were cold professionals who would absolutely eliminate a child if he got in their way. And the show didn't pretend otherwise. That groundedness made the tension feel earned. When Joe infiltrated an enemy installation, when he flew a stolen aircraft through hostile airspace, it felt like something that could genuinely go wrong. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and there'd be no dramatic rescue.
3 interceptor aircraft launched. Have instructed pilots to seek and destroy.
The Story, Part 2, The Journey and Ending. The most memorable episodes. Every fan of the show has at least one episode they can still picture clearly. The Most Special Agent was where it all began. Joe's first mission, stealing a Russian fighter jet to prove the Big Rat technology actually worked. Watching this ordinary kid settle into a cockpit with a pilot's complete instincts, then outmaneuver actual enemy aircraft, that was the moment the show revealed what it could be. It was pure wish fulfillment, and it worked completely. Project 90 pushed into darker territory. Mac himself was in genuine danger, and a scene involving a drill went somewhere genuinely unsettling. Director Desmond Saunders later acknowledged the unpleasant side running through Joe 90's otherwise colorful surface, and this episode showed exactly what he meant. Hijacked was the one that sat with you afterward. Joe's actions led, somewhat indirectly, to an adversary's death by grenade. It wasn't sanitized. It wasn't framed as a clean win. The show let it land with some weight, which felt unusual for something aimed at children. These weren't just adventure stories dressed up with puppets. They were moral complications, and the show was willing to acknowledge that.
Uncle Sam must think it important, calling us out this time of night.
Yeah.
The ongoing mission. The genius of the format was its built-in variety. One week, Joe had a surgeon's hands. The next, he carried a racing driver's reflexes. Then, astronaut training for a space station emergency. Demolitions expertise for a bomb disposal situation. You genuinely never knew what skill he'd need next, which kept things fresh across the whole run. And Joe did grow, even within the limitations of Supermarionation's perpetual youth. Early missions showed real nervousness, the hesitation of a child who understood the stakes. Later episodes had a quieter confidence, earned through experience, carrying the weight of what he'd seen and done. Mac watched all of it, and the show never let him, or us, forget what was actually happening here. His son was becoming something unprecedented, a child warrior. The pride and the guilt sat together in every scene they shared.
Sam Louver from Joe 90.
Okay, Joe.
Loud and clear.
Sam, I'm approaching the Russian border.
The final episode. The birthday gave the show a genuinely warm send-off, which wasn't guaranteed. Joe turned 10. His Wynn family threw him a surprise party. And throughout the episode, Mac, Sam, and Shane looked back on his missions. Flashbacks to his greatest moments, his closest calls, his most impossible successes. The clip show format might sound like a letdown on paper, but think about what it was actually doing. Rather than sending Joe into one final mission, one that could easily have ended badly, the show chose to celebrate what he'd accomplished. To say, he made it, he survived. The people around him love him, and they want him to know that. No cliffhanger, no tragedy, just a boy, his birthday cake, and the people who genuinely cared about him, acknowledging his extraordinary, strange, remarkable life. That was the ending British audiences got anyway.
As I said before, sir, as far as I could tell,
He were about 9 year old. 9 years old.
What American networks changed. This is where things get a little uncomfortable, and it has nothing to do with the show itself. When Joe 90 arrived in the US, American distributors made some alterations. The 1981 compilation film, The Amazing Adventures of Joe 90, took that crucial first episode and removed its framing sequences. In the original British version, Joe's theft of the Russian fighter jet was presented as a fictional scenario. A test, a demonstration of what the big rat could do. More importantly, those framing sequences established that former Cold War adversaries were now working together. Russia wasn't the enemy. The show imagined a world where international cooperation had replaced international conflict. American editors cut all of that out. Without the framing, Joe's mission became genuine espionage against a hostile Soviet power. The progressive message about global unity disappeared. Cold War dynamics stayed intact. American children watched a completely different ideological story than British children had seen over a decade earlier. The creators had always talked about Joe 90 embodying a progressiveness of spirit. Apparently, that spirit needed some adjusting for American distribution in 1981. That's not editing for content or violence. That's editing out optimism.
Okay, we'll go over this once again, Professor. 1. World intelligence will buy, what do you call it? The big rat.
The darker edges. The show had always carried more weight than its puppet format suggested. Desmond Saunders was right about that unpleasant side. For a series built around a child hero, Joe 90 spent a surprising amount of time in morally complicated territory. Mac's near-death in Project 90 created genuine dread. The grenade sequence in Hijacked asked questions the show couldn't fully answer. How does a 9-year-old carry the knowledge that his actions contributed to someone's death? What does that cost him? The show raised those questions. It didn't always resolve them. Maybe it couldn't. But the fact that it asked them at all is part of what made Joe 90 more than just an adventure serial. The premise demanded discomfort, and the show was honest enough to occasionally let you feel it.
I have arranged for you to be escorted to the airport in time for you to connect with your flight.
Why it ended. Joe 90 wrapped after 30 episodes in 1969, following its 1968 premiere. Gerry Anderson moved on to new projects, most notably UFO. Darker, more adult, more willing to sit with bleakness. Joe 90 had said what it needed to say, and The Birthday gave it a proper close. Sometimes a show ends not because it ran out of ideas, but because it finished its story.
As a matter of fact, sir, that's exactly what did happen.
Revival attempts. Joe 90 never got a sequel or a reboot. The compilation films kept him visible through US syndication in the early 1980s. Even in their altered form, new audiences found him. But Joe himself stayed frozen in 1968, perpetually 9, perpetually spinning in that chair, perpetually ready. Maybe that's fitting. His whole premise depended on childhood, that young, flexible mind that made everything possible. Growing him up would have taken away the very thing that made him special. From that spinning chair to that birthday cake, Joe McClane gave kids something they didn't see very often. A hero who looked exactly like them. He wore glasses. He was small. Nothing about him said action hero. But he walked into danger anyway, mission after mission, and he changed the world before his 10th birthday. Joe 90 quietly told every overlooked, underestimated kid watching that they might be more capable than anyone had bothered to notice. The show dared to ask uncomfortable things about what it means to put a child in harm's way. It imagined a world where hope had won out over paranoia, at least until editors decided that hope needed trimming. Which mission do you still remember most clearly? Which skill transfer made you want to climb into that big rat chair yourself? Drop it in the comments. And if this brought you back to 1968, back to Supermarionation, Back to believing a 9-year-old could actually save the world? You know what to do. Stay special, agents.